The alarm wasn't the worst sound in the ER. It was clean, electronic, a predictable shriek with a clear purpose. The worst sound was the wet, ragged coughing of a man drowning in his own fluid, or the keening wail of a mother who had just been told the unthinkable. Tonight, however, the alarm on bed 6 was a close third. It was the sound of a system stretched past its breaking point. Maya Rivera moved through the chaos like a fish navigating a frantic current. For 12 years, the emergency department of St. Fivers, Jude's Metropolitan Hospital, had been her world, a universe defined by the smell of antiseptic, the squeak of worn gurney wheels, and the flicker of fluorescent lights that never seemed to grant the mercy of shutting off. BP is dropping in 4, need another unit of O-neg, someone shouted. Peds is full, they're sending the asthmatic kid back down, came another voice. It was Friday night. The city exhaled its violence, its accidents, its neglected illnesses, and all of it washed up here. Maya was charting a brief, stolen moment of order when she saw Sarah Jenkins approach bed 12. Sarah was new, barely 24, with a perpetually worried expression that hadn't yet been hardened into the cynical mask of a veteran nurse. Her patient, Kevin Miller, was a large man in his late 20s, built like a linebacker gone to seed. He'd been brought in by his parents for uncontrollable agitation, a euphemism Maya knew well. It meant he was jonesing. "I need something for the pain," Miller groaned, his voice a low growl that vibrated with menace. "Now, the doctor will be with you shortly, Kevin," Sarah said, her voice a little too high, a little too fragile. Dr. Owen Evans, his salt and pepper hair perfectly coiffed even after 8 hours on shift, glanced over from his station. He didn't look at the patient, he looked at Sarah. "Just handle it, Nurse Jenkins. Give him 5 of Haldol. It's charted." He waved a dismissive hand and turned back to his computer, a king refusing to be bothered by the squabbles of his court. Handling it was the kind of vague responsibility, shedding order that got new nurses in trouble. Sarah hesitated, grabbing a vial and a syringe. Maya could see the tremor in her hands. She knew that look. It was fear. Every nurse had felt it, that cold dread when a situation felt like it was teetering on the edge of a knife. "Kevin, I have some medication here that will help you relax," Sarah said, her voice trembling slightly as she neared his bed. "I don't want to relax. I want Dilaudid," Miller roared, his eyes wild. "Are you stupid?" Maya put her tablet down. The chart could wait. Her gut, an organ honed by a decade of experience, was screaming. She walked over, her presence calm and steady. "Sarah, why don't you go grab the portable vitals machine? I think we need a new set before we give him anything." It was a pretext, a way to get Sarah out of the line of fire without escalating. "I've got this," Maya said softly to her colleague. She then turned her full attention to the patient, keeping a safe distance. Her voice was low and even. "Kevin, my name is Maya. I hear you're in a lot of pain. We're not going to leave you like that, but yelling at my colleague isn't going to get us there any faster. You need to work with us." For a moment, it seemed to work. Miller's jaw unclenched. He stared at her, his breathing heavy. Then his eyes darted over her shoulder and saw Sarah fumbling with the cart. That fragile image of authority was all it took to break the spell. "You're all useless," he bellowed. With a speed that was shocking for his size, he surged up. He didn't go for Maya. He went for the easier target. He shoved Sarah, a full-bodied, violent push that sent her stumbling backward. She crashed hard into a stainless steel medical cart. Syringes and gauze scattered across the floor with a sickening clatter. Time seemed to slow. There was no thought, only instinct. The primal, protective drive that made her a nurse. The same one that pushed her to run toward the code. Nottoway took over. Maya moved, planting herself directly between the hulking patient and her terrified, fallen colleague. "That's enough." Her voice was a command, sharp and absolute. Kevin Miller's rage, now a wildfire, transferred its focus to her. His face was a mask of pure fury. He grabbed the front of her scrubs, the fabric twisting tight in his fist. Maya felt herself being lifted, her feet scraping against the linoleum. He was impossibly strong. He threw her. Her world became a violent, disorienting slam. The back of her head connected with the corner of a wall-mounted monitor. A starburst of white light exploded behind her eyes, followed by a nauseating wave of black. The air rushed out of her lungs. As she slid down the wall, a searing, white-hot pain shot up her left arm. She heard a sickening crack, a sound that felt both intimately close and strangely distant, as if it had happened to someone else. Through a tunnel of encroaching darkness, she saw him raise a meaty fist. This is it, she thought, a strange, detached calm settling over her. Then, a blur of motion. Brenda McLeod, 60 years old with the tenacity of a wolverine, had launched herself at Miller's legs. Two burly orderlies, finally alerted by the commotion, swarmed him. Maya's body gave up. She collapsed onto the floor, her left arm twisted at an angle that defied anatomy. The cacophony of the ER faded into a dull roar. The last thing she heard before the darkness consumed her was the annoyed, indignant voice of Dr. Evans. "What the hell happened here? This is a mess. Somebody clean this up." 2 days earlier, the world had made sense. St. Jude's ER, for all its flaws, was a place where Maya could make a difference. She orchestrated the controlled chaos with a practiced grace, a conductor of a symphony of beeps, groans, and quiet reassurances. She'd started that Wednesday shift by calming a 6-year-old girl having an asthma attack, her small chest heaving. Maya made a game out of the nebulizer, calling it a dragon's breath machine. The girl's panicked tears turned into tentative giggles, her breathing evening out with each puff of medicated mist. The mother looked at Maya with a gratitude so profound it was a physical force. That look was the fuel that got her through the day. Later, she deftly inserted an IV into the paper-thin vein of a dehydrated 90-year-old man, a patient everyone else had given up on. "You've got the magic touch, dear," he'd rasped, patting her hand. She even shared a brief, friendly moment with Sarah Jenkins, the new nurse who still looked at every procedure with wide-eyed apprehension. Sarah was struggling to program an IV pump. "Here, let me show you a trick," Maya had said kindly. "If you enter the volume first, the rate calculation is easier. Don't worry, you'll be doing this in your sleep in a month." Sarah had beamed, a small but significant boost to her confidence. But the seeds of the coming storm were already there, pushing up through the cracks in the foundation. The department was running on a skeleton crew, a cost-saving measure from an administration that saw nurses as numbers on a spreadsheet. Breaks were a luxury few could afford. An administrator in a crisp suit had walked through the unit that afternoon, his eyes scanning not the patients, but the whiteboards, ensuring regulatory checklists were ticked. He hadn't made eye contact with a single nurse. And then there was Dr. Evans. He'd approached Maya about a patient complaining of post-surgical pain. "He's rating it an 8 out of 10, Maya reported crisply. "Vitals are stable, but he's clearly in distress. I think we should go with the Dilaudid." Dr. Evans glanced at the chart, a sneer playing on his lips. "He's a seeker. Look at his history. Give him Toradol. We're not running a pill mill." "Doctor, the man had his gallbladder out yesterday. He's in legitimate pain," Maya insisted, keeping her tone respectful but firm. "Just do as I've charted, Nurse Rivera," he'd said, his voice laced with condescension. He turned away, the conversation over. It wasn't a collaboration, it was a decree. The unspoken message was clear. "You are a pair of hands to execute my orders. Don't think." That night, Maya had gone home to her small, neat apartment. It was her sanctuary from the hospital's relentless demands. She sat on her couch, an ice pack pressed against her aching feet, the silence a balm. On the phone with her sister, she vented about the double shift, the bureaucratic nonsense, the sheer exhaustion. "I don't know how you do it," her sister said. Maya looked at a framed photo on her bookshelf, a picture of her, at her nursing school graduation, her face bright with idealism. "Today, I helped a little girl breathe," she said, her voice soft. "I held an old man's hand while he was scared. It's worth it, I think." That belief, fragile as it was the core of her identity. It was the reason she got up every morning and put on her scrubs. She had no idea it was about to be put on trial. Reality returned in sharp, painful fragments. The ceiling tiles of her own ER. The face of a first-year resident, Dr. Chen, looking down at her with a mixture of clinical concern and pity. The blinding pain in her arm, a furious, throbbing entity that seemed to have a life of its own. "Complex spiral fracture of the humerus," Chen said, his voice gentle. "And you have a concussion, Maya. We need to keep you for observation." She was a patient now, a piece of damaged equipment. The transition was dizzying. One moment she was the caregiver, the next she was the one being cared for, a passive object on a gurney. Dr. Evans appeared at the foot of her bed. He didn't look at her injury. He looked past her, his gaze fixed on the disruption she represented. "You should have waited for security," he said, his tone clipped and annoyed. There was no sympathy, no concern for the colleague who had just been violently assaulted in his department. Now we're down another nurse on a Friday night. The wait time is going to be 3 hours. Maya stared at him, bewildered. The pain in her arm was a physical reality, but the sting of his words was a deeper, more venomous wound. He wasn't seeing a person, he was seeing a logistical problem. Then came the cops. 2 uniformed officers, their expressions bored and weary. They stood over her gurney, their notebooks open. "So you work here?" the older one asked, a pointless question. "Yes," Maya whispered, her head throbbing. "And you got in between the patient and the other nurse?" His partner chimed in. "Did you touch him first? Try to restrain him?" The question hung in the air, thick with implication. It wasn't a search for truth. It was a search for a box to tick on a form. Victim-initiated contact. "No," she said, her voice shaking with a nascent anger. "He shoved my colleague. I stepped in front of her to protect her." The older cop sighed, a long suffering sound. "Look, the patient, Mr. Miller, he's got issues. He's being transferred to a private psychiatric facility as we speak. His family is prominent. Pressing charges on someone who is not mentally sound, it's a long, difficult process. Usually goes nowhere. They weren't there to seek justice for her. They were there to manage the paperwork. They made her feel like an inconvenience, a messy complication in their otherwise routine night. Before they could take her up to a room, a man in an expensive suit approached. He was in his 50s, with silvered temples and a smile that didn't reach his cold, assessing eyes. "Maya Rivera?" he said, extending a hand she couldn't shake. "Mark Davies. I'm the director of risk management for the hospital." He didn't ask how she was. He didn't acknowledge the cast on her arm or the pained look on her face. He pulled a chair close, his movements precise and reptilian. "I just need to ask a few preliminary questions for our internal review," he began, his voice smooth as oil. "Were you aware that the hospital's de-escalation protocol, Section 4B, states that staff should maintain a minimum distance of 6 feet from an agitated patient?" Maya blinked. He was attacking another nurse. Davies made a note on his tablet, ignoring her answer. "And were you certified in advanced physical restraint techniques? I don't see that on your HR file." "I'm not security," she managed. "Precisely," Davies said, a flicker of triumph in his eyes. "The protocol is very clear. Call security, do not engage. I understand Nurse Jenkins is also not certified. This will all be part of our review." He slid a thick packet of forms onto her blanket. "This is the workers' compensation paperwork. We'll need your official, signed statement as soon as you're able. Try to be as detailed as possible. Legal will want to review it to assess the hospital's exposure." Exposure. Not her broken bone. Not her concussion. Not the terror of the attack. Her entire traumatic experience was reduced to a single, bloodless word. She was a risk to be managed, a liability to be contained. Lying there, helpless and in agony, Maya felt a new kind of cold seep into her bones, a chill that had nothing to do with shock and everything to do with the dawning, horrifying realization that she was utterly alone. The next day, Maya was at home, her arm encased in a heavy plaster cast and held immobile by a sling. The pain was a constant, throbbing drumbeat, a physical reminder of the attack. But a different, more insidious ache was beginning to bloom in her chest, the pain of betrayal. She called Sarah, her voice raspy from a combination of pain medication and exhaustion. "Sarah, it's Maya. I just wanted to see if you were okay." There was a choked sob on the other end of the line. "Maya, I'm so sorry." "It's not your fault," Maya said instantly. "You did nothing wrong." "No, it's..." Sarah's voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. "They cornered me, after my shift last night. Mr. Davies and Dr. Evans. They took me into a conference room." She took a shuddering breath. "They said the hospital's initial review suggests the whole thing was mishandled. That you acted aggressively and outside of protocol. They said if I wanted to have a future at St. Jude's, I needed to be a team player. They want my statement to reflect that." Maya felt the air leave her lungs. It was one thing for the system to be indifferent. It was another for it to be actively malicious. They weren't just ignoring the truth. They were trying to rewrite it. "Sarah, they're lying. They're trying to intimidate you." "I know," Sarah whispered frantically. "But I have student loans, Maya. I can't lose this job. They said my statement could determine whether my probationary period is successful. They were threatening a brand new nurse, using her precarity as a weapon to silence her." Maya felt a surge of protective fury, but it was quickly swamped by a feeling of helplessness. Her fears were confirmed an hour later when an email landed in her inbox. The subject line was stark. Official communication regarding workplace incident. 22 Jul 2025. It was from HR. The language was cold, corporate, and utterly divorced from reality. It referred to the event as an escalation involving patient K. Miller and nurse M. Rivera. It completely omitted the fact that Sarah had been assaulted first. The narrative was twisted to frame Maya's heroic intervention as the sole trigger for the violence. Then came the final paragraph, the one that made her blood run cold. Pending a full investigation into the matter, this letter serves as a formal reprimand for failure to adhere to established hospital security protocols. See Employee Handbook, Section 4B. You are hereby placed on administrative leave, effective immediately. You are not to return to hospital property or contact current staff regarding this matter until the investigation is concluded. She read it 3 times, the words blurring through a haze of disbelief and rage. Reprimand. They were punishing her. She had been attacked, injured, and traumatized while protecting a colleague, and the institution she had dedicated her life to was now officially blaming her for it. Furious, her hands shaking, she called the one person she knew wouldn't sugarcoat the truth. Brenda McLeod picked up on the second ring. "Let me guess," Brenda's gravelly voice said, without preamble. "You got the email?" "Brenda, they're blaming me." "Of course they are, kid," Brenda sighed. Her tone wasn't surprised. It was weary, freighted with the weight of long and bitter experience. "Welcome to the club. The second your arm snapped, you stopped being a nurse, and you became a liability, a very expensive one. They're not going to protect you. They're going to protect the hospital's bottom line and the delicate feelings of their wealthy donors, the Millers." Maya's head swam. "What do I do?" "Listen to me carefully," Brenda said, her voice dropping. "They're going to try to isolate you. They've already warned everyone off from talking to you. They will dig into your record, looking for any tiny mistake you've ever made to discredit you. They are counting on you to be too tired, too hurt, and too scared to fight back. They're counting on you to take the workers' comp, sign an NDA, and disappear. You have to decide, right now, if you're going to let them." A week later, the world had shrunk to the 4 walls of Maya's apartment and the sterile corridors of the orthopedic clinic. Her physical pain was a managed misery, but the psychological wounds were festering. She was in the hospital for a follow-up appointment, feeling like a ghost in a place that was once her second home. As she waited for the elevator, she saw him. Dr. Evans walking down the hall, laughing with a group of residents. He saw her, and for a fleeting second, his face registered something a flicker of guilt, perhaps before it hardened into a mask of indifference. He tried to brush past her. Maya stepped in his path. She couldn't let it go. "Owen." He stopped, his posture stiff with annoyance. "Maya, I hope you're recovering well." The platitude was so empty it was insulting. "I want to know why you're letting them do this," she said, her voice low but steady. "You know what happened. You were there. You saw him shove Sarah." Dr. Evans glanced around, ensuring no one was listening too closely. He scoffed, a puff of derision. "I saw a chaotic situation that, frankly, you escalated, Maya. You have a history of being overly emotional. You put yourself, the staff, and frankly my patient, at risk. The Millers are rightfully upset. Their son was provoked." Provoked. The word struck her like a physical blow. She felt the blood drain from her face. It was a complete, shameless lie, delivered with the casual arrogance of a man who had never been questioned. He turned and walked away, leaving Maya standing by the elevators, her entire body trembling with a righteous fury that was so intense it made her nauseous. That evening, the phone rang. It was a number she didn't recognize. "Miss Rivera, this is Mark Davies." His voice was different now. The silky, professional veneer was gone, replaced by something colder, harder. "I'm calling because it has come to our attention that you may be considering outside legal counsel. I'm going to strongly advise you against that." "And why is that?" Maya asked, her heart pounding. "Because the hospital's internal process is more than fair," Davies said smoothly. "And initiating a lawsuit antagonizing the administration will not be beneficial for the processing of your workers' compensation claim, or for your future employment prospects at St. Jude's should you be cleared to return to work." It was a threat, wrapped in the sterile language of corporate procedure. But he wasn't finished. "Furthermore, I think you should know that the Miller family is exploring their own legal options. They believe their son, a vulnerable patient, was assaulted by you during his stay. A lawsuit like that could be very damaging to a nurse's professional reputation. That was it. That was the moment the floor fell out from under her. They weren't just blaming her, they were preparing to crucify her. They would use the family's wealth and influence to paint her as the aggressor, the unstable nurse who attacked a sick patient. They would destroy her career, her name, her life, all to avoid a payout and an embarrassing news story. After she hung up, Maya sat in the deepening gloom of her living room, the city lights beginning to glitter outside her window. The medical bills were piling up on her coffee table, ominous white envelopes filled with impossible numbers. The reprimand letter sat beside them, a testament to her institutional betrayal. The physical pain in her arm was a dull ache compared to the crushing weight on her soul. She felt utterly and completely broken. They had isolated her, they had discredited her, they had threatened her. She looked at her nursing degree hanging on the wall, the proud, hopeful face of her younger self smiling back. It seemed like a cruel joke. Brenda was right. They were counting on her to give up. And in that dark, quiet moment, surrounded by the evidence of her own destruction, she almost did. She was drowning in paperwork, a sea of jargon-filled forms from the workers' compensation insurer. Her head was foggy from the painkillers, but she forced herself to focus, rereading her own initial statement, a document she'd written through a haze of shock. And then, a single detail snagged in her memory, sharp and incongruous. The patient's wristband. She closed her eyes, forcing herself back into the chaos of that moment, just before the shove. The blare of the alarm, the smell of antiseptic, the wild look in Kevin Miller's eyes. She had glanced at his wrist. It wasn't the standard white patient admission band. It was green. A green visitor's pass, repurposed with his name scrawled on it in black marker. Her eyes snapped open. Adrenaline, sharp and clean, cut through the fog of her medication. A green band meant he was never formally admitted. They hadn't put him in the system. Why? She remembered glancing at the triage notes on the screen just before she stepped in. They were holding him in a busy ER bay for hours, off the books. It was a practice called boarding, a dangerous violation of protocol, usually done as a favor for the well-connected to bypass psych holds or long admission processes. They hadn't just covered up the attack. They had covered up the systemic failure that made the attack possible. This was the piece they thought she'd never find. The revelation was a spark in the darkness. It was not enough to just feel wronged. Now she had a target. Miles away, Sarah Jenkins was living in a state of quiet terror. Every shift was a minefield of averted gazes and whispered conversations that stopped when she approached. The guilt was eating her alive. Maya had broken her arm for her, and she had repaid that heroism with cowardly silence. Dr. Evans treated her with a cold formality, a constant reminder of her precarious position. But Maya's refusal to back down, the story she'd heard whispered through the grapevine, had planted a seed of courage in her. Late one night, when the ER was in a rare lull, she sat at a nursing station, her heart hammering against her ribs. She logged into the hospital's EMR system. Her hands shaking, she navigated to the triage archives for July 2020, and there it was. Kevin Miller's record. A triage entry time-stamped at 4:15 p.m., no admission order. No formal chart, just a string of nursing notes detailing escalating agitation. She scrolled further, her breath catching in her throat. She found 2 prior ER visits from the last 6 months, both for behavioral issues, both with notes from nurses describing violent outbursts. Both times, he had been discharged against medical advice after his parents intervened. The hospital knew. They knew he was a risk. They had a documented history, and they still let him fester in an open bay, attended by a new nurse. With trembling fingers, she inserted a small USB drive into the computer. She downloaded the triage log, the nursing notes, the records of his prior visits. Each click of the mouse felt like a gunshot in the silent ward. She pulled the drive out, slipped it into her pocket, and logged off. The little piece of plastic in her pocket felt as heavy as a brick. Maya, armed with her theory, called Brenda. She didn't have to explain twice. Boarding? Brenda breathed into the phone. The dirty little secret of every private hospital ER. Of course. That's their weak spot. That's the thing Davies would kill to keep quiet. But I can't prove it, Maya said, frustration creeping into her voice. Maybe not, Brenda said, a new energy in her voice. But I know someone who can. The next afternoon, the three of them met in a dimly lit corner of a coffee shop, miles from the hospital. Maya, her arm in a sling. Brenda, her face set in grim determination. And Sarah, who looked like she was about to faint. Across the table sat Ben Carter, a local investigative journalist whose byline was synonymous with exposing institutional rot. He was younger than Maya expected, with kind, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. Maya laid it all out. The attack, the dismissal from Dr. Evans, the victim blaming from the police, the insidious gaslighting from Mark Davies, the threats. She told him about the reprimand, about the pressure put on Sarah. She finished with her theory about the boarding. Ben listened intently, not taking notes, just absorbing every word. When she was done, he nodded slowly. "This is more than one nurse's story," he said, his voice quiet but intense. "This is about how a hospital's duty of care is compromised by money and influence. It's a fantastic story. But a theory isn't enough. Their lawyers would tear it to shreds." Maya looked at Sarah. The young nurse took a deep, shuddering breath. Her hand went to her pocket, and she pulled out the USB drive. She slid it across the smooth surface of the table. It stopped in front of Ben Carter. "Here's your proof," Sarah said, her voice shaking but clear. "Everything is on there. The logs, the prior visits, the notes they ignored, everything." Ben picked up the drive. He looked from Sarah's terrified but resolute face to Maya's fierce, hopeful one. A slow smile spread across his face. "Ladies," he said, "let's go to war." 6:00 p.m. Ben Carter's article hit the front page of the Metropolitan City Chronicle's website with the force of a thunderclap. Hero nurse blamed, bullied by St. Jude's after saving colleague from violent attack. The headline was a declaration of war. The article was a masterpiece of controlled fury. It laid out the narrative with damning precision. Maya's heroic act, the hospital's immediate pivot to self-preservation, the official reprimand. It included quotes from an anonymous junior nurse, Sarah, who described being intimidated by senior staff. It mentioned the Miller family's status as major hospital donors. And then, in the final paragraphs, Ben detonated his bomb. Citing leaked internal documents, he detailed the practice of boarding Kevin Miller, the hospital's documented knowledge of his violent history, and the gross negligence of placing him in a high-stress environment without proper precautions. It wasn't just an attack anymore. It was a predictable outcome of a corrupt system. 9:00 p.m. The story exploded. The link was shared across every social media platform. The hashtag #StandWithMaya began to trend, first locally, then regionally. Nurses from St. Jude's and other hospitals started sharing it, adding their own anonymous stories of workplace violence, understaffing, and administrative bullying. The St. Jude's official Facebook page, usually a curated feed of smiling doctors and fundraising galas, was overrun. Hundreds of angry comments flooded every post, demanding answers, demanding justice for Maya. The firestorm had begun. 11:00 p.m. A local TV news station, seeing the viral traction, ran a segment on it for their late-night broadcast. They put Maya's photo on screen next to a picture of the gleaming St. Jude's facade. The narrative Davies had worked so hard to control was not just broken, it was being publicly shredded. 9:00 a.m. The next day. Mark Davies stood on the plush carpet of the CEO's office, a cold sweat beading on his forehead. The chairman of the board was on the speakerphone, his voice crackling with fury. Dr. Evans stood near the window, looking pale and ill. "What in God's name is this, Mark?" the chairman roared. "I have 3 board members calling me. My wife saw it on television. Leaked internal documents. How did this happen?" "We are handling the situation," Davies began, his usual smooth confidence deserting him. "It's a disgruntled employee, a clear violation of—" "I don't care about her violations. I care about ours," the chairman bellowed. "Is it true? Did we have this man's history? Were we boarding him?" Davies was silent. The silence was his confession. "Fix this." The CEO, a man named Henderson, said, his voice dangerously low. "Fix this now. I don't care what it takes." 12:00 p.m. Maya's phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number, but she answered it. "Ms. Rivera? This is Susan, assistant to CEO Henderson. The board of directors would like to request an immediate meeting with you today at 5 p.m., 0 p.m., to discuss a resolution." The woman's voice was strained. They are prepared to be very generous. We can messenger over an NDA for you to sign beforehand. Maya felt a surge of adrenaline. This was it. She took a breath, remembering the plan she had made with Brenda and Ben. I will attend the meeting, she said, her voice clear and strong. But I will not be signing anything, and I will not be coming alone. Nurse Sarah Jenkins and Nurse Brenda McLeod will be accompanying me. There was a pause on the other end. That is highly unusual. Then this will be an unusual meeting, Maya said. Those are my conditions. 5:00 p.m. She hung up before they could argue. 4:55 p.m. Maya, Sarah, and Brenda walked through the gleaming, opulent lobby of the hospital's administrative wing. It was a world away from the controlled chaos of the ER. It was quiet, smelled of money, and was decorated in hushed, corporate tones. They didn't belong here, which is precisely why their presence was so powerful. Sarah, who had been trembling in the car, straightened her shoulders as they entered the elevator. Brenda gave her a subtle, approving nod. Maya felt a calm settle over her. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, hard sense of purpose. They were led into a vast boardroom dominated by a polished mahogany table that seemed a mile long. CEO Henderson sat at the head. The board chairman, a portly man with a florid face, sat to his right. And there, sitting further down the table, were Mark Davies and Dr. Owen Evans. Davies looked ashen. Evans refused to meet her gaze, staring intently at a notepad. 5:00 p.m. The chairman cleared his throat, opening the meeting. Miss Rivera, we are here today to express our deepest regret for the miscommunication and distress this situation has caused. St. Jude's values its nurses, and we want to rectify this matter. He slid a folder across the table. We are prepared to offer a generous settlement package in exchange for your silence on this. It's not a communication problem, Maya said, her voice cutting through his placating tone. It wasn't loud, but it silenced the room. It's a systemic one, and I'm not here for a payoff. She stood up, her sling a stark white symbol of their failure. She looked at each person around the table, holding their gaze. On July 2020, I was violently assaulted while protecting my colleague from a patient your hospital knew was a violent risk. My arm was broken. I suffered a concussion. And in the hours and days that followed, the institution I gave 12 years of my life to did not help me. It attacked me. She turned her gaze on Dr. Evans. You, Dr. Evans, abandoned your colleague and chose to protect your own ego. You lied about what you saw and called me emotional and unstable. She then fixed her eyes on Mark Davies. He visibly flinched. And you, Mr. Davies, orchestrated a campaign of gaslighting and intimidation? You tried to coerce a terrified young nurse into lying? You threatened my career and my reputation. You didn't manage risk. You tried to silence a victim. You didn't protect the hospital. You protected its worst, most negligent impulses because you thought I was too weak and broken to fight back. The room was utterly silent. The chairman's face was beet red. Maya leaned forward, her good hand resting on the table. So, no, I don't want your hush money. I want accountability. I have a list of demands. She slid a single sheet of paper across the table to the CEO. 1. A full public apology from this board, posted on your website and sent to the media, retracting my reprimand and acknowledging the hospital's failure to protect its staff. You will name me and praise Sarah Jenkins for her courage. 2. The immediate termination of Mark Davies for unethical conduct and gross professional negligence. 3. A formal external professional conduct review for Dr. Evans, focusing on his treatment of nursing staff. 4. The immediate creation and implementation of new nurse-led safety protocols. We will call it the St. Jude's Promise. It will include mandatory security presence for any patient with a documented history of violence. And 5. A legally binding guarantee of no retaliation, now or ever, against any staff member who has supported me, especially Nurse Jenkins. She sat down. The silence stretched. The chairman looked at the CEO. The CEO looked at his lawyers. They were trapped. Maya's story, backed by evidence, was public. The hashtag was still trending. The PR nightmare was getting worse by the minute. Her demands were not about money, they were about justice. To refuse them would be to prove her every point. The chairman finally picked up the sheet of paper. He read it again, his jaw tight. He looked at Maya, his eyes full of a grudging respect. We accept your terms, he said, the words sounding like they were being pulled from his throat. Mark Davies stared, his mouth slightly agape in disbelief. Dr. Evans sank lower in his chair, the picture of defeat. In the opulent boardroom, under the gaze of the most powerful people in the hospital, the nurse they had tried to break had broken them instead. The apology arrived faster than Maya could have imagined. By the next morning, a formal statement was on the front page of the St. Jude's website. It was everything she had demanded. A full-throated apology that named her, praised her heroism, and acknowledged the hospital's profound failures in protocol and judgment. It announced a top-to-bottom review of safety policies, to be led by senior nursing staff. It retracted her reprimand and expunged it from her record. Ben Carter's follow-up story was simple and triumphant. Hospital board apologizes, fires executive after viral outcry from hero nurse. The victory wasn't just a private settlement. It was public, documented, and undeniable. That afternoon, a friend still working at the hospital sent Maya a blurry cell phone picture. It was of Mark Davies, carrying a cardboard box filled with his personal effects out of his office, his face a mask of grim defeat. 2 days later, an internal memo announced that Dr. Evans had been placed on an extended administrative leave pending the results of his professional conduct review. When Sarah Jenkins walked onto the floor for her next shift, the atmosphere was different. The whispers were gone, replaced by quiet nods of respect. A few older nurses gave her a thumbs up. She had found her voice, and people were listening. Brenda met Maya for coffee, a rare, genuine smile on her face. "You did it, kid," she said, shaking her head in something that looked like awe. "You actually did it." You stared them down and they blinked. A few weeks later, CEO Henderson called Maya personally. Her arm was healing, the cast replaced by a brace, but she knew she couldn't go back to the ER floor. The place held too many ghosts. "The board has approved the creation of a new position," Henderson said, his voice stripped of its earlier arrogance. "Director of Nursing Advocacy and Safety. It would be your job to implement the St. Jude's Promise. To be a voice for the nursing staff at the highest levels of administration. We want you to take it." It was their penance, and it was her opportunity. "I accept," she said. Months later, Maya stood at the head of a conference table, not as a victim or a liability, but as a leader. Her arm, now free of its brace, had a faint, silvery scar on it, a permanent reminder. Seated around the table were nurses from every department, along with the new head of security and a chastened-looking HR representative. This was the first meeting of the Patient and Staff Safety Committee. "The old protocols failed because they were written by people who don't work on the floor," Maya said, her voice confident and clear. "Our new protocols will be designed by us, for us. We will protect our patients, but we will also protect ourselves. Let's get to work." Sarah Jenkins sat across from her, no longer a timid probationer but a passionate, articulate member of the committee, advocating for better training for new nurses. She had found her power in the crucible of Maya's fight. After the meeting, Maya walked to the window of her new office. It overlooked the ambulance bay of the ER. She watched as a paramedic crew rushed a new patient through the doors, a scene of controlled chaos that was once her entire life. She unconsciously touched the faint scar on her temple, where her head had hit the monitor. It no longer felt like a mark of injury. It was a reminder not just of a violent attack, but of a system that had tried to crush her and a strength she never knew she possessed. The fight hadn't been about one night, one patient, or one broken bone. It was about turning a scar into a shield, not just for herself, but for every nurse who would come after her, for every person who felt voiceless against a faceless system. The apology, she realized, wasn't the end of her story. It was the beginning.